Good evening, and thank you all for being here. We've been looking forward to this very special event on a very incredibly important topic, 5G. We've been looking forward to this for a matter of months, and we're so fortunate and honored to have our guest speaker here, who is world-renowned in the area of biophysics, and we're so glad and fortunate that she's visiting the East Coast from the West Coast. I want to make sure that we get her here to present her body of knowledge on the area of 5G, which she has become a very much leading proponent of education in the risks and dangers of 5G. Since we're here in New York City, I must say that it's so important that we realize the telecoms are already placing new antennas all over the city. I've seen the maps. You can Google yourself, you'll see for 5G cells near me, and you'll see. So it's so important that we get informed about the science behind 5G, about the fact that it has never been adequately tested, which is an issue all on its own. How could it be rolled out when it hasn't been proven for safety? And we must get involved in the understanding the politics behind it all, to be part of the effort to educate our elected officials to do the responsible thing, which is to demand that the telecoms and the related agencies do what they must do to make sure the public is protected. So there's a lot of work here, and it's already begun. There's been many people for a matter of years here working on this effort to educate the public and to take steps for, again, political action, which is so necessary against these ultra-powerful forces behind 5G and behind the FCC and related agencies. Efforts are already underway here in New York again, and there is a flyer on the table over here about what you can do to be part of this political action. It's a one-pager. Gives you a script that you can follow, and make sure you get that and be in touch with us, and we'll be in touch with you. With that, I'd like to welcome an old friend who I'm so happy to have here in New York, who's a student here at the Union Theological Seminary, and have him come up and say a few words and introduce our guest speaker. Please welcome Byron Belitzos.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you, Les. Les Jameson is the convener of the group, and when I found out that they were looking for another speaker, I also found out that Beverly was going to be here from California, and I know her from having lived there for decades. We are friends, and I have been to her lab where she researches this sort of topic. So I have personally seen the empirical work that she does that you're going to hear about, and I can really vouch for her work. Let me just say a bit about her bio. Beverly Rubik earned her PhD at U of California at Berkeley in biophysics early on when that was a new field, and she's grown up in the field and has conducted research in biophysics-related matters for 4 decades. And she, in her work, began to look at the energetic aspect of the body and of life. And she is one of the people that, she won't tell you this, but she's one of the people that coined the term biofield, that you may know. And that has now become a widely used term for understanding the energetic aspect of the body and energy medicine. So she's also a pioneer in the energy medicine movement. She's renowned now in this field of energy medicine, biofield studies, and is the author of over 90 scientific papers and 2 books. And she's conducted research on 4G. So years ago, as just a friend of hers socially, I started hearing about 4G effects from her and started getting educated about what that does to people who are electrosensitive or to children, pregnant women, so it's a huge issue already that is more or less suppressed. Now 5G is a whole nother huge matter that we'll be hearing about tonight, so it's getting to be a crisis. She has worked on this along with many other researchers around the world whose research is not really acknowledged by the FCC and other agencies because of the paradigm issue that you're going to hear about. Also, there was recently something called the 5G Crisis Summit. So I urge you to look that up because she was a keynote there. It's the5gsummit.com. And while you're at it, look up the article in Scientific American. It's easy to find under Scientific American, and it's called "We Have No Reason to Believe That 5G is Safe." And that's Scientific American. And there's much more than that. Beverly is also the president of the Institute for Frontier Science. That's in Emeryville, California. And she's an adjunct faculty member at the College of Integrative Health Studies at Saybrook out in California. Anyway, I'm delighted and honored to have Beverly Rubik here tonight. So please give her a welcome.
Thank you so much, Byron, for your kind introduction. And it's really great to see all of you. And if you're here tonight, it's because you've taken the red pill. And you'll see what I mean. First, I'm going to describe what 5G is, how it works, and then some of the health and environmental challenges, and then also delve into some of the political issues, some of the laws, and some of the activism that I'm aware of, at least in my region. And finally, I'm going to give you positive ways to deal with some of these things, not all of them, but of course we're all working together to try to either put a moratorium on this until it's proven safe, or to figure out how we can live safely and be well in the presence of an enhanced 4G and the new 5G. So that's the structure of tonight's lecture. So smoking, in my lifetime, was once considered glamorous and recommended even by physicians as being good for your health. Here are some ads from late 40s, early 1950s. So this is just what the doctor ordered, and movie stars with their beautiful smiles advertising tobacco. So in many ways, wireless is the tobacco of the digital age. In other words, it's a bit of a fad, as smoking was back in those years. Everybody has something wireless, multiple wireless devices, and actually there's an exponential increase in wireless devices in our environment, and it's going to grow stronger and stronger. So the wireless world around us, I should say one more thing. Smoke is something we can smell, we can sense, we know it's present, but the thing about wireless radiation from communication devices is that we have no sensoria to know it's present. Unless you have a meter or a dosimeter, you don't know what you're being exposed to. And so that makes it different. Some have likened it even to asbestos, which is very hard to remove once it's in place. And that is one of my fears about 5G. If we put up an infrastructure and then we find out that it's really not healthy, that we're suffering, the animals and plants are suffering, well, who's going to pull it down, and what do we do then? So we have to wise up about this before it's installed. And the installation is upon us. Already the rollout is starting worldwide, and 2020 is the time when we can expect very wide rollout of 5G in our environments around the world. So we have this plethora of wireless devices. Everything from smart meters that fit into the smart grid, from computers that operate on wireless, from cell phones and tablets and Wi-Fi routers, And it's only going to grow because 5G promises the Internet of Things, whereby many of your appliances, and maybe all of them eventually, will be hooked up to the Internet. So that's what's coming. So this is exponentially increasing, but if we go back and look historically, how did this come to pass? It was back in 1992 when broadband first came into vogue. In 1996, we had the first generation of wireless with cell phones and towers, but very few of them, and a cell phone was a big clunky device in those years. In 1998, the beginning of some low-orbit satellites delivering these frequencies, so-called 2G, and in 2001, the beginning of Wi-Fi with 3G. Then in 2007 was the introduction of the smartphone, which has now grown to be the major communication device, personal communication device on Earth, and that's 4G, under which we presently operate. But 5G is coming, and it doesn't, we will still have 3G, 4G, and possibly some 2G. They're just adding more. What will it do? Well, it will give us faster download speeds, according to the ads out there. It will bring in self-driving cars and their capability to be targeted by satellites and safely navigate, we wonder. It will expand virtual reality and give us augmented reality and bring about this vast Internet of Things, whereby billions of devices, many of them currently are in homes and offices, are going to be hooked up to the Internet. So that's what 5G is all about. And it's much more complex than the earlier generations because it has multiple frequencies, not just a couple of them, like one for cell phone sending, one for cell phone receiving, and ditto for Wi-Fi, just a couple of frequencies in the microwave region. 5G extends from microwaves all the way to the millimeter wave region, the so-called gigahertz bands. And previously, these waves were often used for radar, by the military, by the police force, and the higher frequencies here, 95 gigahertz, is used by the military for a non-lethal weapon called the active denial program, where they can disperse a crowd by beaming 95 gigahertz on the crowd, unbeknownst to them, and they will feel their skin is intensively burning and they will run. You can see videos of this online. So this will be one of the frequencies of 5G as we understand it. And the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, which is the organization in the federal government responsible for allocating these frequencies, is already licensing some of these bands to the various providers or companies such as Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint, and there may be others. And so the licensing is not yet fully accomplished, but it's underway. Now, the infrastructure on Earth, of course, we're talking about the equipment. What is needed is a lot of infrastructure. It will cost an enormous amount of money, many billions of dollars. And where I live, they've already rolled out this thick cable, as you see here, the fattest cable connecting our phone poles is consisting of fiber optics, which is cross-sectioned here. So there are clear tubes through which visible light passes and can carry digital signals. Now, if 5G were simply fiber optic cables with digitally pulsed light, I would be truly delighted, because this is completely safe. There's no blowback on any organism. Everything is self-contained within this fiber and within that cable. But then, from the point where these cables end on the post, they're going to be installing these 5G antennas, which look like large cylinders. That's merely a shroud around the phased array of antennas inside. And with it, there's also a very large power supply, about the size of a mailbox. Here's one. In some places, they're going to have this on the ground in public rights-of-way, or it could be put on your easement. It depends on your telecom ordinance in your city and county where these things may go. So you may want to check into that online and start talking locally to your government if you feel the placement of these things is otherwise than you'd like. So here's the shroud, and inside the phased array antennas. So these are the structures on Earth, and there's going to be millions of them. They're talking about placing these so-called small cell antennas for 5G every 200 to 1,000 feet, even in our residential areas, even near our schools. in places where we haven't had cell phone antennas. That really concerns me because these things will be at a virtually bedroom level if you have a second floor home, and telephone poles are all over the place, so you may be just a few feet from sleeping near one of these installations. And what is that going to do over the long run? Well, we really don't know because we don't have those long-term studies. We only have short-term studies. So we can expect millions of these antennas. I can tell you I've been involved in the Oakland community where I live about this because I'm concerned about these things entering our residential neighborhoods as well as around schools. And for a while, the city was hearing from us that we don't want this. And for the health reasons, as I stood up and made a speech to the city council, but they said, you know, we don't have any jurisdiction over that. So you can only talk really about design of the antenna, of the shroud, and maybe the color of it, and maybe a little bit about the placement if you feel it's a busy intersection and maybe it would cause an accident or something. But we don't have jurisdiction over health and wellness or environment, really? So anyway, I'll say a little later how that came to pass. It's very amazing that our local communities seem to have lost jurisdiction over the people's health and the local environment, but it is so, according to certain federal laws. The other infrastructure for 5G will be out in space. And the recent estimate is some 42,000 5G satellites that will be blasting the Earth so that every square inch of Earth is covered with these frequencies that will come down from these satellites in lower Earth orbits. 3 companies in particular are responsible for these. SpaceX is Elon Musk's firm, which will make most of the satellites. Amazon is number 2, and another company called OneWeb. And I went to the website of OneWeb, and it's boldly said on its homepage, "We will cover you wherever you are." Yes. So you can see back in 1957, that was the beginning of the space age with the Russians' launch of the Sputnik. I remember it well. I was a little girl. So that was the very first satellite that went into space around Earth. By 1993, we already had a lot of satellites, and by 2018, you can see this bird's eye view of Earth. We have probably 5,000 satellites out there already doing global positioning satellites and some for 4G and 3G, but this is going to make 42,000 more satellites in our environment. And I should also mention that the 5G will not involve a loss of 4G. Actually, the 5G antennas that they're going to install will be at the flip of a switch able to also deliver 4G. In other words, we're going to see a densification of 4G frequencies as well as the advance of the 5G frequencies. So the current presidential administration is on a race for 5G, and we're fighting versus the Chinese to beat them, according to President Trump. It's estimated that this will cost many trillions of dollars to bring it forward. And so the federal government is mandated a fast track through the FCC and through certain rulings. Now, I've been to China within the last 8 months, and I can tell you I really think they're ahead of us. First of all, Huawei, which is one of the main telecom firms making wireless 5G out of Shenzhen, China, right near Hong Kong is their capital of Huawei. They already have the chipsets for these frequencies, and of course the Chinese can always make it less expensive. So when we roll out our chipsets, they're going to be more costly. We can expect that more countries and possibly parts of the US will rely on Huawei. I know President Trump's concern is that perhaps the Chinese may spy on the American public if we were to use Huawei, but I think there are also financial considerations here, because if we don't do it, then the Chinese will gain financially. So, you know, that's what that's all about. There's a lot of talk about the economic benefits of 5G in terms of stimulating the economy and making breakthroughs, whatever they are in the future. We don't even know what that may hold. And his administration wants to be the first, or at least he's guided by advisors that tell him that. So it's quite concerning that that is the case. Now, there are some laws on the books. These are federal laws that I'd like you to know about. The Wireless Communications Act of 1996, signed into law by President Clinton, actually prohibited local governments from considering health and even environmental effects when considering proposed wireless installations. I mean, in 1996, we barely had Wi-Fi in our environment, but the telecom industry, through lobbyists and through legislators who were probably greased by the money of telecom in their campaign funds, made this possible, put this into words that was passed and signed into law. And it's really amazing because now we're stuck with this law. Local communities apparently have no jurisdiction because of this federal law, but it's being contested by many governments, local governments, who feel that their local jurisdiction is being breached by the federal government, that it's not constitutional. So we shall see where that leads. There are lawsuits in place. I know that two cities that I know well in the San Francisco Bay Area, both Mill Valley and San Jose, have sued the federal government over issues such as this and the FCC ruling, which I'll say in a moment. And that's interesting to note because San Jose is really part of Silicon Valley, protesting this law. Also, back in September 2018, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, said that they're in complete control now of the 5G rollout. It's not up to local communities, and there's a fast track. And now many cities have had thousands of applications for permits for these new antennas, and they have no time to review them. I know in Oakland we've had 3,000 or 4,000, and now it's becoming a rubber stamp operation. Have no time to read this lengthy thing, even have to just push it through because the FCC says we're on a fast track. We've got to get it all done. There's a so-called 60 to 90-day shot clock. And already that shot clock is over by now, by November 2019. That was mandated by them, and it really prevented adequate local review. So we've got these things coming to your neighborhood school regions, to your residential homes, without any environmental review. That's the main thing. And people are pointing that out, that we have among the federal laws, we have the National Environment Policy Act that goes back yet to 1969 that may be violated here because there has been no widespread environmental review of 5G and no impact statement that has been drafted. So some governments are taking this on and suing the government, saying you've got to do this review. It hasn't been proven safe. And you're talking about such a wide rollout worldwide without a white zone, without a place to go if there is somebody who's sensitive. And we know there are people who are sensitive, as I'll tell you later. So 2020, it's the target date for the 5G rollout here in the United States. And we can expect that every device that we currently use will be made obsolete, and then we're going to need to buy new ones that will have 5G, so that's an enormous expense for all of us, plus an enormous carbon footprint in terms of throwing out or the heaps of old devices and the onset of new devices is formidable. The antennas of 5G, the 5G satellites, the 5G routers, the 5G smartphones, and then the Internet of Things, of course, the so-called smart appliances that will be responsive and blipping out 5G frequencies as well. So it's the largest thing of its kind in maybe the history of the Earth to see a technological thing at this scale and to see it on a fast track and coming to you tomorrow. It's just totally amazing. So 5G is different, as you heard, in some ways. First of all, they're planning the total coverage of the Earth. That means national parks, which presently don't have Wi-Fi. Where are those animals going to go? You know, we find, and it's been shown in one of the Australian national parks, that where they put in Wi-Fi, the animals left. They simply went elsewhere. And where are ours going to go? And plants are impacted as well. I'll say some words about that later. So the animals are affected in terms of their orientation and navigation. And I know bees are drastically affected by this. They can't even zoom in on a flower. They can't smell anymore. They can't learn, and there's colony collapse. So they're planning millions of antennas and thousands of satellites beaming those frequencies, covering the Earth. And it's not like broadcasting, and I'll show you the distinction in a future slide here. Broadcasting is like dropping a pebble into water and the waves spread out evenly and they get weaker with distance. These are focused beams, like pencil-thin beams, not lasers, but thin enough. They were like lasers. They're not coherent like lasers, but in any case, they will go out over here and there and pass around in milliseconds or microseconds through your environment. They may come right through your body to energize your cell phone, for example. So, as I said, it also includes high-frequency millimeter waves that were used by the military for radar and weapons. And here's another thing. Only extremely expensive military equipment can measure, especially the high 5G frequencies, the millimeter waves. There's no simple meter that you can buy. Right now, you can buy a 4G meter, and you can measure your workplace, your sleeping place, where you spend time, your home, and get a sense of your exposure. But with 5G, nobody's going to be able to do this except maybe the industry and the military. This equipment costs about $150,000, and you need more than a PhD to use it. It's very complicated. And so we don't have a way for the public to monitor themselves, and so they may leave it up to the industry. And even the studies on 5G health effects by the industry are different from independent studies. They produce different results that are not harmful. So we can't really trust the industry to make these measurements on our communities, but that's where it's being pushed. And in my community, we're trying to get independent measurement, at least, independent oversight of what exposures are we getting, especially as we have multiple providers, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint. Are they going to have multiple antennas in our communities too? I mean, it becomes just amazing and formidable. So here's a comparison of broadcasting versus beamforming. You can see there on the left the standard angle of about 120 degrees for wide-angle broadcasts. There are usually about 3 4G antennas, each at 120 degrees on the cell phone towers of today. But 5G will be different. It will have many so-called phased array, a lot of different little antennas underneath that cylindrical shroud that you saw. And these beams will be going out and maybe spending a microsecond in each direction. So it's a very different concept, beamforming of 5G. Here's a little bit more technical slide to show you the near field is very intense, but there will also be lobes. So the main beam will go in one direction, but then you see side beams as well. And all of these, of course, will add up because many devices will be emitting the Internet of Things, the antennas, your phones, everything around you. So it'll be an endless barrage of signals. And what's interesting is that the organization of engineers that sort of oversees this, the electrical engineers, the IEEE group as it's called, what are they concerned about? They're concerned about crosstalk between the Internet of Things. In other words, when you have this many signals out there, will you really be able to send that signal to your refrigerator, or might it go instead to your stove and be misread? You know, I mean, that's the conversation that's going on in the engineering world, that maybe it's a formidable task to make them all unique and working at the same time. So that they're not talking about health or the environment, however. But again, they're engineers. Well, I'm going to show you, at least on this video. This is from the industry, Radwin 5000 phased array. And I basically just want to show you the pictures of the beams as they currently envision these beams coming out from devices and servicing the environment. So here we go.
Wireless service providers continuously strive to increase network capacity to serve more subscribers with higher capacity. However, service providers operating in 3.5 GHz licensed bands are challenged by lack of spectrum and the moderate capacity of existing WiMAX point-to-multipoint systems. Service providers operating point-to-multipoint in license-exempt bands also find it hard to deliver SLA due to the adverse effects of signal interference from third-party systems.
Looking to redefine the performance of broadband wireless access, Radwin 5000 Jet, a point-to-multipoint solution with disruptive smart beamforming, was introduced to the market. Jet beamforming solution is formed from an array of antenna elements that are combined to generate a narrow and steerable beam for increased system gain, ultimately boosting capacity and range. Interference immunity is greatly improved as a result of replacing the wide beam of common sector antennas with a narrow beam.
Together with Radwind's unique air interface, JET assures SLA services in noisy spectrum where conventional solutions fail to operate. In typical point-to-multipoint deployments with a wide beam antenna, adjacent beam sectors overlap, creating a high level of self-interference that reduces user capacity. Unlike typical sector antennas, JET narrow beam reduces self-interference between adjacent sectors and nearby sites to a minimum, achieving greater network capacity through unmatched frequency reuse. When line-of-sight conditions are compromised, JET Smart Beamforming Antenna automatically chooses the optimal beam direction for the best link over a reflection or diffraction path, empowering service providers with wider coverage and better infrastructure utilization.
So here I have a chart showing the numbers of times above nature in engineering units we're being exposed to. Basically, nature, that is the sun and the stars, are not producing any microwaves or millimeter waves. At least none of them are reaching the Earth. So down here is the green zone. This is nature. It's essentially, it's minus 115 decibels or 1.8 picowatts per meter squared. That's really negligible. But you can take a meter and walk through various cities. I unfortunately didn't bring my meter here to New York, but I've walked through the streets of San Francisco, and I can tell you we find about minus 35 decibels, which is here, somewhere between severe anomaly and extreme anomaly. Who set these standards are the biobiologists. These are the people, the building biologists, who work to produce clean environments for their clients. Electromagnetic pollution is reduced, chemical pollution reduced, et cetera, with healthy building materials. So they consider what I measured just in the streets of San Francisco, somewhere between a severe and an extreme anomaly. Yes. And then you go in the buildings where there's Wi-Fi or nearby someone who's using a wireless device, and these values go even higher. They go in the red zones. And we have a limit in the United States of some 10 decibels per meter up here, along with Canada. We have possibly the highest guidelines set in the world for the most exposure, because China, Russia, and Switzerland have values that are between 100 and 1,000 times less than our guidelines. And it's not exactly clear why our guidelines are so severe, why we allow such high levels, but we do. And yet, when I go to Europe, my phone works perfectly fine. So it's not a matter of my phone not working at a lower level. It's a matter of a decision of the FCC and listening to the industry about so-called thermal limits out here. And we're just a little bit below that. But we're really higher along with Canada than any other country, and there's no excuse for that. This is a chart of the electromagnetic spectrum, and on the far left are the long waves. First the ELF and then the radio spectrum here. Also microwave is sometimes also considered part of the radio wave spectrum. And just above it are the millimeter waves. And then we have the terahertz, which is the frequencies they're using in the airports in that scanner where you put your hands like this and they scan you. That's the terahertz waves, not a healthy wave either. And then we have infrared. And all these waves below the visible region have been called non-ionizing radiation, which means we thought that they didn't make ions in the body. The waves above visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, gammas, are well known to have deleterious effects to life. They cause ionizing effects. It's ionizing radiation, and you get free radical production and things like superoxide ion, and you have to fight and worry about this, which is why they put lead aprons on you when you get your teeth x-rayed at the dentist. So it was thought that only these rays produced ions and free radicals, but now from a plethora of evidence, we also know that this region in the radio frequency region, including the microwaves and the millimeter waves, also produce free radicals in our bodies, which are not healthy. These are very highly reactive ionic species that then go on to react with all of your biomolecules, your DNA, your proteins, especially your unsaturated fats, poking holes in cells, allowing things that shouldn't happen suddenly to happen. So they do a broad range of biochemistry pollution inside the body. So here's the radio spectrum, but there's more. We're talking about a digital spectrum. What does that mean? You know, digits are ones and zeros. That's really what computers manipulate. It's something is either off or on, 0 off, 1 on. That's what's meant by digital. So these waves are not continuous, but they're pulsed, like a big pulse and then maybe a still time when there's a 0, and then another big pulse and maybe a train of them, several in a row, and then nothing. Now, no living thing can adapt to such a train of waves, such a sequence of waves over time. I could, for example, stand at the light switch and go on, off, 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 and try that for the rest of your life. That's what we're talking about. And you know, the government reports on the average value of that on and off and says, well, you're only exposed to really low light because it was on and off, and we're only looking at thermal effects here, as it's called in physics. The average doesn't really impact you, but that's in an inaccurate way. It's a really twisted view of addressing the science. And it's really totally unfair not to consider the non-thermal effects, as you'll see. Life is an analog beings, as we are, and is used to continuous waves in the environment, like sunlight shining on us is coming continuously, maybe varying over the course of the day or the hour. And the spectrum of sunlight is also continuous, not like these LED lights that we're now using in our streets and homes. This is healthy light, peaking in the green and going down to infrared and a little bit of ultraviolet. That's what reaches the Earth. That's healthy light, and we need to get exposure daily. And yet, people have been scared to go in the sun now. I'm telling you, the news has frightened people to the point of using sunscreens or hats or staying out of it during the brightest times. It's completely wrong, really. Light is essential to life, not just plants, but animals. And you feel healthier when you get out there and fresh air and sunlight. So we have nothing digital in nature. This is totally man-made, and man-made signals now of the digital age. And being analog beings, we can't adapt to these. But I can tell you that 6G, which is coming out in 2030, will be the interface of the machine to the human body. By then, they will have figured out that we can't handle this, I suppose. So, just to give you an idea of what is in the radio frequency, this is a chart that's available online of the radio spectrum. Here is the allocations from the FCC and the military of, I just show you this, I know you can't read it, but it's a very complex chart showing some shared allocations and some singular ones and very few regions that have been untouched. In other words, it's already allocated to the various industries and military installations, radar, etc. Now here's a closer view of that, but here are the 5G frequencies overlaid, and you see how numerous and how complicated, what a great portion of the radio frequency spectrum we will be using with 5G. Very, very different from earlier generations. And we know those higher frequencies have more biological effects as well. So now let's take a look at the devices. Well, we've got 7 billion cell phones worldwide. And it really breaks my heart to see children use them as shown here, held to the head. And yet, people give the phones to their child. The child wants the phone, wants to talk to a relative, or wants to play with a wireless device, used as a pacifier. It's very sad. You see people with, well, Bluetooth is one thing, but this is much worse. The Bluetooth also on your ear is about 1/3 the radiation of a cell phone. And it too can play havoc with your health. But it's become the main personal communication device. And so we have to be very concerned. Here's where we have the most control, really, over our choices, as you'll see toward the end of my talk, in terms of limiting our exposure. So what happens when you put a cell phone to your head? Well, it depends on who you are. If you're a young child, that microwave radiation penetrates most of the brain. It looks like shown on the left. The skull of a child is about 0.5 millimeter thick and will allow most of the radiation to impact the entire brain. This is why children should never be given cell phones, because they are developing. Their brains are still growing and developing, and they're learning. And numerous biological experiments show that every developing organism is more sensitive to pollution or stressors. And they can have a breakdown or a deficit in their development from such exposure, and we don't even know how, because it's never really been studied. A 10-year-old has 1 millimeter thick skull, and so radiation will penetrate less, but still more than the adult, where the skull is 2 millimeters thick. And then you get less penetration, but still, even with that, nobody should be holding a cell phone to their brain. I can tell you, because I've looked at the brain waves in electroencephalograms, the EEG. Normally, people have more coherence in their brain waves. That's a sign of health and wellness and concentration or being awake. And when they put a cell phone to their head, it looks like an electromagnetic storm in some cases. In other cases, it looks like epilepsy. And if you were to keep putting a device to your head that created aberrant neurological patterns, what do you think happens after years of use? Well, you're actually training a disease state. You're training your brain to make aberrant waves that we know brain waves are associated with learning and behavior and state of consciousness. So this is serious, and we should never put a cell phone to our head, no matter what age, but especially the children. And we know that there are some thermal effects. People feel that their ear heats up a little bit when they hold their phone. Some people feel sensations, but by and large, we're pretty blind to, we don't have a sensation of what happens inside the brain from other effects that are not just thermal. But this is shown on thermography, that there is heating. But beyond tissue heating, wireless does something really worse, and that is it opens up what's called the blood-brain barrier. This is a barrier that prevents certain toxic chemicals from entering your brain. It's like a membrane that's not so permeable. But when you put a cell phone near your head, after about 10 minutes, this membrane gets porous, and then toxins get into your brain that otherwise would be excluded. And that's the blood-brain barrier being disrupted. So microwaves damage it. Then chemical toxins from our environment, from agrochemicals, glyphosate, from vaccines, preservatives such as mercury and aluminum, and the adjuvants that are in our vaccines that are actually pro-inflammatory chemicals that are there to stimulate and aggravate an immune response to the little bit of antigen present in those vaccines. So we have an epidemic these days of diseases like autism, of attention deficit disorder, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. And we're getting into an epidemic of more chronic diseases of the elderly, like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And I think there's reason to suspect that we can point to this problem as one of the causal factors. And certainly, children are getting vaccines. Everyone's getting exposed to agrochemicals. There was a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association that showed that glyphosate, which is basically the technical name for Roundup, the herbicide previously made by Monsanto, now shuffled over to Bayer due to the merger, that is in our urine, that we have it inside our bodies. And it was studied and shown to every adult, even those consuming organics. Even the organic wines of California have been shown to have glyphosate, much to my dismay. So we have this 1-2 punch. We have chemical toxins, we have electromagnetic waves also acting. And yet it's often so that activists are working on one item. They may be working against mercury in vaccines, but they're seemingly unaware that Wi-Fi is interacting with this, producing more damage, because now this stuff can get into the brain. So we have to consider systems of pollution and not just the single entities that are polluting us when we become activists in this realm, because these things are working in concert, sad to say, synergistically damaging our brains. Now, we have no safety standards for wireless. The word is guidelines. Lots of people use blatantly the word safety standard or standard. That's a misnomer, because if you really go to the FCC website or the FDA website, you will see clearly the word guideline. They know they don't have any standards. And Dr. Barry Trower, who is an expert on microwave weapons in the UK, he's now retired, he has addressed this question more than most. You could watch some very informative videos of Dr. Barry Trower on this issue of what are the standards. Can we come to standards? He would probably say we shouldn't be using this stuff from what he knows about microwaves. So, well, age, pregnancy, years of exposure are factors. One thing I can tell you is that the doses are cumulative. That means the more you get, the worse off you are. Just like X-rays or radioactivity. You know, people can die from an overdose of radioactivity, as we've seen at Fukushima, going in too soon to clean it up, hours later, death. So these waves are doing the same thing, but at a lower level. And we're going to now have worldwide exposure for the rest of our lives, where we don't have a clue what the standards are. And we haven't had this conversation as a whole with people. And we don't know our dosage. Pregnant women, of course, are more at risk. The fetus is more at risk. And you see women often balancing a tablet right on their abdomens or juggling a young child in one hand with a cell phone in the other hand. And as I said earlier, it's impossible for us to adapt to these pulsed digital signals. Then we have to consider how the phones are used and carried. Many people keep a phone on, ready to receive a call or text, right in their pocket, right in the chest pocket or the pants pocket, and right near major organs and tissues that are susceptible. And there's been cases of cancer where a woman tucked it in the bra. In fact, the tumor was exactly the shape of the cell phone antenna in her breast. Yes, you can see evidence of this online. So, how the phones are used and how they're carried, everybody's unique in this regard. We know the younger generations use it more than the elders. And some people just have it on all the time and even sleep with it or right next to it, totally oblivious about safety issues. We really don't know the long-term exposure issues. All of the studies, of course, necessarily are on short-term animal, plant, and human studies because we haven't had a continuous outpouring of this forever and ever. So we only know really short-term effects, and the long-term exposure is really unknown. So you can see it's a very complex question, and there's no consensus. You ask different engineers, different experts, you'll get different answers. And we have only guidelines. So here's how we see people using these devices. Pregnant women with tablets right near their fetus, young children lovingly touching wireless devices and touching pictures, watching them move, and seemingly mesmerized by these things. Even the potty trainer that I've seen has a wireless screen built in where the child can scroll and enjoy themselves and learn to multitask at a very early age, because that's coming for them in future life. We've all learned to multitask with all of these devices in our lives. So there we are. And the wireless baby monitors in the United States, I've noticed all of them in Europe were wired when I was there. There wasn't a wireless one. So you can apparently get them in Europe and not here. So the official view on exposure guidelines and safety that were set really by the telecom industry telling the FCC what it wanted. And I should mention the FCC is a group of 5 people who come from the industry. It's only 5 people, yes. None of them are scientists, none of them are doctors or healthcare workers. None of them know anything about the environment. They're basically engineers or businessmen, and they moved from the industry to the FCC, so now they're all in bed with one another. And it's been said that the FCC is really a captured part of the federal government by the telecom industry. So they've set this thing called specific absorption rate as their guideline, not to exceed 1.6 watts per kilogram. And recently they took some time to review this guideline, and they said, we'll keep the same guideline for 5G. Well, of course, we already have almost saturated conditions with 4G. I don't know how that's going to work. And this is really only based on thermal heating. What does that mean? They start with this little mannequin, a kind of head and shoulders mannequin, and it's hollow, and they fill it with salt water with physiological saline. They put a temperature thermistor or thermometer in the center of the head, and then they strap on a cell phone on this mannequin, and they're looking for evidence where the interior of the salt solution will heat up. That's how they determine what's safe. Okay? They're not considering the wave train of digital pulses that are very disruptive and aggravating, to which no brain wave can adapt, no heart wave, no organism can adapt. So it's called the thermal effects. That's all they're really looking for. And they totally ignore what other countries use, such as Russia. Russia's done a lot more research on this whole realm of radio frequencies and health. Their guidelines for exposure are 100 times less than the US, and they do pay attention to non-thermal effects. And I'll tell you what those are in a subsequent slide. In Austria, 1,000 times lower guidelines than the United States. Another telling fact is that the US insurance companies do not insure any cell phone providers or the industry that provides the signals, the wireless telecom industries, because they know there are health risks. So they can't get any insurance whatsoever. Interesting. So what are the health effects of wireless due to non-thermal effects? This is a short list, but it will show you that there are effects from the atomic and molecular realms all the way up to performance and behavior in humans. So it's a very wide range, from involving also gene expression and breakdown due to disease. So we see damage in the DNA, breaks in the DNA, and uncoiling. We see mutations in the DNA. Most of these studies were done on animals to show these effects, our close relatives like monkeys or rodents. And altered gene expression, even in fruit flies exposed to typical doses of cell phone radiation that a human would get. We see a total different gene expression coming out, which we don't even know what that means. We see reduced sperm count and fertility, and that's been known in a few studies offshore in humans. Male sperm count and the motility of the sperm, the movement of the sperm was totally damaged. So the sperm were essentially dead, unable to fertilize. And there was a study on mice where they put cages of mice near a Wi-Fi router, which is 2.4 gigahertz. By the way, that's the same frequency as microwave ovens. Not a healthy one. But the mice near these routers then proliferated, and every generation made less and less mice until the fourth generation, which became irreversibly sterile. No more mice. So this is all in the literature. I'm not making this up. And the literature of many countries and thousands of papers in peer-reviewed scientific and health journals. So let's go on. Detrimental effects on fetal and child development. Certainly seen clearly in rodents and monkeys. Not so clear on adults, because who's going to do those experiments on humans? It's certainly difficult, if not impossible. You wouldn't want to destroy a child. Neurological changes, including brain degeneration and cognitive impairment, and learning and memory deficits. Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, who's a holistic physician in Seattle, did an experiment on people who were healthy and said, I have no sensitivity to cell phone or wireless radiation. And he put them and cloaked them so that they did not experience any. They were literally shielded from the cell phone and Wi-Fi radiation. And they admitted in questionnaires in a study that they could think more clearly. And they couldn't believe it, because it was like 90% could think more clearly and concentrate compared to the usual state here in the world exposed to relatively high levels. So we know that even people who claim not to be sensitive are having effects on concentration. Oxidative stress is what goes on at the cellular and subcellular level. So these free radicals form. They're highly reactive species that are charged. They have free electrons, and they want to bind to something and rip out electrons from something else. And so they play havoc with all your biomolecules, including DNA, proteins, and fats. So they will simply slowly irk the functionality of cells and destroy their structure. Of course, your cells can try to repair themselves, but then it becomes a game of breakdown and repair, breakdown and repair. Every night you try to sleep, and sleep is also affected. So cardiovascular disease, we see the beginning of palpitations, and then escalation to heart arrhythmias and even more severe heart ailments, because the heart is probably the most important electrical organ in the body. When you start aggravating it with strange frequencies, then you're leading toward heart disease. So a metabolic and immune system disruption, eye and skin damage. We have, I would say, an epidemic of cataracts, even in middle-aged people today, from screens, the brightness of screens, and blue light, which is not very good for them. And the World Health Organization has classified 4G as a human 2B class carcinogen, which means that it's a probable carcinogen. And they've linked it to higher incidences of brain cancer, gliomas, which are very deadly forms of brain cancer that are practically a death sentence. People usually last up to maybe 1 or 2 years maximum. And acoustic neuromas. And there's even salivary gland tumors in the cheeks because of use of cell phones that people never saw before the advent of cell phones. So the non-thermal effects are well documented. There are thousands of studies. Here are just a few websites where you can read them, you can access them. Bioinitiative.org, there are 1,800 references to the peer-reviewed literature, and European reference also, which is in the National Library of Medicine, is shown at this PubMed site. And then an even older reference that was given by the military after all their experiences with radar in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, the Glaser report of 1971 that summarized a lot of the radar damage in the military on human studies as well. So, so those are just a few of the websites where this is listed for you, and it's out there. It's available to all. These are usually free studies. You can just download them. So besides the free radical damage that I mentioned with very fast reactive species, there's another possible mechanism by which the waves, both microwaves and millimeter waves, may be damaging our bodies. It may be opening certain ion channels on the cell membrane and allowing more calcium or other key electrolytes to penetrate. So getting more calcium in the cell is problematic because calcium is highly regulated because it itself is a regulator that enters into regulating many biochemical reactions in our bodies. So thereby we begin to see multiple effects from biochemical up to epigenetic and genetic levels. And if you're interested in exploring this, I recommend the publications and the websites by Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L. He has done a lot of work on this. So electrosensitivity, this is a growing syndrome that was recognized by the World Health Organization already back in 2011. Back then they said between 3 and 6% of the population is already electrosensitive, and this number is probably upwards of about 10%. Many of you may not realize that some of your symptoms may indicate that you're sensitive to Wi-Fi or your own cell phone. And here are some of the common symptoms. You don't have to have all of these to be electrosensitive, but if you find yourself working extensively with a wireless device and then feeling one or more of these symptoms, you've got electrosensitivity. Headaches, anxiety, irritability, sleep problems, restlessness, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, memory issues, ringing in the ears or tinnitus, heart palpitations and arrhythmias, depression, fatigue, and there are others. Nosebleeds is a recent one. So I myself, I bought a desktop computer. With it came a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard, which is fairly standard whether you need them or not, because at a workstation, you're not running around the house. Why do you need a wireless mouse? Why a wireless keyboard? Well, they come this way. It's considered sexy to have wireless. As I said, it's a fad like smoking. So I was sitting in front of this thing over hours. I started to get irregular heartbeats. And I recognized that I might have some sensitivity, but I also thought, well, I'm getting older. Maybe I'm having a heart problem. But the minute I switched back to wired keyboard and wired mouse, guess what? My palpitations went away in a short time. So it showed me that I myself, who know all these things, was suffering from an aspect of electrosensitivity. We should all be electrosensitive. These people are our canaries, the canaries in the coal mine who are telling us something is radically wrong with the plethora of these devices and the way we're using them so frequently and keeping them on as if they're passive and like FM radios. They're not. They're active. This is an interesting report by Blue Cross and Blue Shield that studies over 100,000 millennials born between 1980 and year 2000. And they're probably the least healthy generation in the history of the United States, I'm sorry to say. And I'm not blaming them. I just want to point out the data. First of all, they're the generation that grew up using wireless. And they're heavy users. They rely on it. They communicate with one another, texting and calling and Facebooking and all of that. And we've seen a sharp decline in their health already at age 27. And this study looked especially between a 3-year period, 2014 to 2017, and found depression up 31% in 3 years, hyperactivity up 29%, type 2 diabetes up 22%, hypertension, high blood pressure up 16%. Ages 34 to 36 had 21% more cardiovascular conditions and 15% more endocrine conditions in 2017 than 2014. And it's certainly not the only factor in their lives that would predispose them to these chronic things, but wireless is clearly a factor we can't ignore. I suppose it's one of the key factors, although I can't prove that. The tricky thing about these sorts of toxins is that you don't see a one-to-one direct relationship with any particular disease, but rather you see a constellation of symptoms and increased chronic disease patterns forming, because that's what stressors do to the body, to our bodies and our minds. They work at all the levels of order, organization in the organism, and they produce havoc at all levels. So lifelong wireless irradiation may be a major factor here, and it's a very sad thing, and I hope the message gets out to them that they need to change the way they use these devices in their lives. I want to tell you about a pilot study I did on 4G, and my research question was, is the blood affected by a short-term exposure to a smartphone? Of course, I was using 4G phones because this was done a few years ago, and even now there are no 5G phones yet, coming soon. So my study design was exploratory with 10 healthy adults. I used a single smartphone, and the adults range in age from about 21 to 75. And there were also adults who were eating very good diets, because I had to look at blood and make sure that they started out looking healthy in the blood in the study, because I was looking for damage in the blood. And so I chose people consuming the diet of our ancestors, that is organic produce, vegetables, fruits, raw milk, raw cheeses, animal meat that was pastured, raw wild fish, and olive oil and coconut oil, but not the industrial-made oils. So that was the diet, and they basically had, most of them had very good-looking blood in the initial baseline exposure, without any exposure. And then they wore a cell phone, a smartphone, for 45 minutes in a backpack, turned on, ready to receive a call or text, but they did not receive one. It was just a matter of being exposed to what's called a carrying condition, the way many people just carry a phone on their bodies in a pouch or a pocket. And then they had another blood test to look at the carrying condition effect. And then they played with the phone for 45 minutes actively, going on the internet, listening to a YouTube video, and they made 2 5-minute phone calls, holding it near the head but not touching, about an inch away. So I photographed their blood using dark field microscopy, and this is what I found in subsequent slides. So here's my setup. I have a dark field microscope with a video camera and can take still photos as well. They made finger pricks, or in some cases we did toe pricks as well, because people would argue, well, they're holding the phone in their hand, and that will cause an effect in the finger blood. But of course the blood is circulating, so just to be sure, I took toe blood samples too, and we saw the same results. Here's how healthy blood looks under dark field microscope. The round circular black circles are really red blood cells lit from the sides. Then you see one white blood cell moving toward 2 o'clock, caught in the act of motion here. And that's normal. You see many more red cells than white cells in human blood. And the plasma, shown here, is clear and black. There's not many inclusions or debris in this blood. This is the blood of an elderly person on the Weston A. Price diet, but it's very unusual to see blood this good. So here is my 75-year-old subject, female, in baseline condition. Her blood is a little bit sticky and maybe not ideal, but certainly still normal. And after 45 minutes of carrying the phone in the backpack, on the right-hand side, you see the blood is all stuck together. The red blood cells are as if It's a roll of coins, and I'm looking at the edge of the roll of nickels. So they're stacked. And this blood is, it simply can't circulate in the peripheral circulation of microcapillaries, because the blood requires you to go single file with each cell through those microcapillaries. And so it simply would not circulate very well in any organ or tissue. It would get stuck. And it's what happens when you get older as well, is that the blood tends not to circulate so well. And after using the phone for an additional 45 minutes, this is the picture. Bottle cap shapes with spikes sticking out. These are called echinocytes in hematology. That's a spiky, like an echinoderm sea urchin. And again, in hematology, these would be signs of liver damage. These people were fasted for 4 hours, and already it was 6 hours later, so I couldn't keep them in my office to study, well, how long do these effects last? Unfortunately, because they were hungry, I had to send them out. And after they eat, then the blood gets full of fat and I can't see anything. So this was just an initial pilot study to look for an effect. Here's an example of another subject, male 55, initially good-looking blood over here. After carrying the cell phone in a backpack, here is the appearance, sticky cells, not quite the rouleau, the rolls of coins that we saw in the earlier subject, but still much stickier. And then, after using the phone actively 45 minutes, all spiky echinocytes. So, in fact, such results were seen in 9 out of 10 subjects, but it was especially so in people 50 and up. The younger people did not show such pronounced effects. They did show effects, however, and especially following cell phone use. So it seems that the cells first aggregate and then they break apart and then they change shape. I suspect what Dr. Martin Paul says is the calcium is coming into the cells. The membranes are affected, as you can see. They're no longer integral. The cell shape has changed. So I should point out that these people were eating a fine diet, and the Weston A. Price Foundation funded this study thinking that their diet would prevent cell phone effects, but in fact, it didn't. I don't think any diet is going to prevent this. If that diet doesn't do it, I don't know of a better diet, really. So I published this actually in the Weston A. Price Foundation Journal. It's called Wise Traditions in Food Farming and the Healing Arts, and you can read it online at www.westonaprice.org, where it's freely published. So we are energy beings. We are operating electromagnetically with electricity and magnetism in our bodies. This is part of life function. Brain waves, heart waves, blood, everything is charged in the body, charged proteins, DNA, etc. So why wouldn't they be susceptible to this radiation? They are. And we're susceptible to energy coming from other living beings, from the earth, the sun, and now from our technology. And it's the unnatural frequencies. First, the body tries to make such similar frequencies, tries to entrain to them. We know that this is how living beings try to accommodate them. They try to actually make those rhythms. But no living analog being can make digital rhythms. So it becomes an aggravation. Here's an example of an electrosensitive person in effects on the biofield. I mentioned that I do a lot of work on the energy field of humans, and we develop equipment also to do this. But this is using a special device from Russia called the Gas Discharge Visualization Camera. Today in its form is called BioWell. And it's a camera similar to Kirlian photography that assesses the corona discharge from each fingertip and then pieces it together to form this composite field around the body. So this is really derived from all 10 fingers. And the Russians have looked to see what meridians are present in the fingertips that might relate to a certain organ pattern, and then they draw that connection and create this composite biofield. So this woman came in, she says, I can't use my computer anymore. It's a mess because I have a job where I must use my computer. I said, well, bring your notebook computer and let's see how things go. So initially she looked pretty good. She had not used her computer that day. She worked 1 hour at the computer in my laboratory, and this is the picture of her biofield. You can see that the energy has shrunk, is distorted, It's left-right imbalance. This is typically what I see from electrosensitive persons. But here's the biofield of a person who says, I'm not electrosensitive. I feel fine around these devices. They come in, they look like this with a much better biofield. It's more uniform, there's very few gaps. But after 30 minutes of wireless radiation, you can see a change already. The biofield is more fractalated, and there are missing parts and irregularities. So that's the picture of chronic stress. And there's a software to analyze this in this program, which I'm not showing you here, but just visually, you get the picture that this is a stressor. And we know from many studies that organisms can take just so much stress. And stress accumulation is like the accumulation of raindrops in a rain barrel. You can only get so many drops in there, and then it overflows. And what happens when the stress overflows? We have breakdown, we have disease, we have symptoms. So that's what we're up against. In the environment, we see effects on plants. There's not so many experiments in the field, but there are experiments in laboratory studies on plants, only a few in the field. But what happens when the radiation is shined on tomato plants or other crops that we eat is, again, the same thing. We see more stress-related biochemicals in those tomatoes, as if it's starved for nutrients or lacking water or other stressors. So the stress chemistry then is in our produce, that which we're eating. Free radical chemistry, that's not healthy. We see collapses in the insect population, and especially the pollinators. We see that the orientation as well as the navigation of bees, other insects, birds, and mammals is challenged by this radiation. They don't go near cell phone towers. They left national parks in Australia where they put in Wi-Fi. And they're talking about putting it in the United States. They say, why should we deprive people? They should be connected wherever they go. Are they thinking about the animals and the fauna and flora? Seems like they're not. Then they found in experiments on microbes, on pathogenic microbes such as Listeria and pathogenic E. coli, the bad one that gets in the meat sometimes, growth stimulation of microbes and increased antibiotic resistance. That can't be good. We already have trouble dealing with these microbes, and they're stimulated. And there's not too many experiments yet on that, but it's indicative that if we do pull this off and bring it and encase the Earth with these frequencies, we're headed for environmental collapse in many ways. So we really need to see this position paper, this impact report done. And there is growing health and environmental concerns. I'm not the only scientist talking about this. There really are a lot of us who are coming forward, who've reviewed the literature and who are tearing our hair out at the lack of environmental impact reports that have been produced to date on 5G. This is an international 5G appeal launched by more than 231 by now. Scientists and MDs, it's www.5gappeal.eu. And there's a moratorium on 5G in various parts of the world. In Brussels, the mayor of Brussels made a public statement, said, it's not proven safe, it's not going in Brussels. Parts of Switzerland, certain cantons that have just made a vote on this, said, we're not getting it now, it's off limits for now until proven safe. And parts of Rome and Germany, and I already told you, or maybe I did mention, I went and lectured in Italy. And the Italian government will make this an issue on their upcoming election coming up soon. So we have a number of federal lawsuits on the books now trying to stop 5G. The Santa Fe Alliance for Public Health and Safety in November 21st, 2018. These things are still in progress. There are many cities across the country that are suing the federal government for various reasons, jurisdiction issues, or the fast track and no time to review. Mill Valley, California, San Jose, California, and there are others. And those lawsuits are in various stages of litigation. I haven't followed up on them. One thing I did learn about was that the Native Americans came together and under a certain tribe, then they, representing all the native bands of Indians in our country, they won in a district court of appeals in DC. They won, and they will keep their sacred lands from getting any antennas based on two laws, the National Environment Policy Act and a National Historic Act whereby their lands are historic and special, and that doesn't mean they're casinos, but they're sacred lands, will be exempt from the antennas. That was a lawsuit recently won, August 2019. That doesn't mean it wouldn't go to the Supreme Court, but so far so good. So, and there are other things, maybe some of you who are activists can bring them out during our discussion time. So there's an international appeal to stop 5G in Earth and on space, and here's the 5GSpaceAppeal.org. And by the way, this website also has one of the best reviews of the environmental and health effects, with all of the references, citations and references, extremely well documented, like any professionally written scientific or health medicine paper. So as of November 6th, last I looked, 172,395 signatures from people in 204 countries and territories, including 4,500 scientists, 8,000 engineers, and over 22,000 medical doctors and other healthcare workers. So that's enormous, and I'm pleased to see, and you can go there and sign it as well. Everybody should sign it. Let me mention that there are some very extreme views on 5G. Some people wonder, how did this get so far? And what's really going on behind the scenes, that this has come to be mandated quickly, etc. These are the views of some groups. I bring them to you. There are websites associated with them. Some believe that 5G is about total surveillance. It's through all of the devices that we use, all of our appliances, etc. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. They will know exactly what you are and what you're doing, as if they don't know a lot already from your Wi-Fi and your cell phone. But this is the ultimate in surveillance in terms of all the energy that you use and when you use it and how many minutes, etc. It's reminiscent of China's total surveillance state, where they have not only the Wi-Fi, they're using their phones to make all purchases. I didn't see any evidence of coinage or bills in China, even though I got some bills to function in China. People are using only cell phones, and they've got this thing wrapped around their neck on a special cord, and it's constantly in use, and they have battery backup chargers and things plugging in all the time. So facial recognition software, the works, there it is, and we're headed, I think, in some ways toward something similar. Some hypothesize that this is about artificial intelligence takeover, and that's an interesting view. Stephen Hawking said that AI could spell the end of the human race. He said that before he passed. So it's possible. I mean, this is more about artificial intelligence and control of robots and machine-to-machine intelligence, really. Because when you get the Internet of Things, that's what you're talking about, machine-to-machine intelligence. And I can imagine the robots that are going to be rolled out in about 5 to 10 years will be operating on 5G, if not subsequent Gs. So, and some say this is a depopulation agenda. When we look at the effects that we can predict on humans as well as plants and animals on Earth, it's what it looks like, according to some. And there's a website, you can watch videos on this. And some are targeted individuals, whereby they say, this may be related to more of the same. And these people claim that they are receiving some kind of directed energy weapon, and is playing havoc with their minds, with their health, pain syndromes. And it's really hard to understand this, but I can say this, that back in the 1970s, it was shown by Dr. Alan Fry, a biophysicist, that direct stimulation of the temporal lobes, which are right underneath your ears, by microwaves, with modulation of those waves, can make people experience the feeling of voices in their heads, so-called microwave hearing. When, of course, microwaves don't stimulate your ears, only sound does, only within a certain narrow range. He stimulated the hearing of waves directly through the brain. So, if that is so, well, then there's a possibility for how some of these things may be. The next on this list is the directed energy weapon. So I already mentioned the 95 gigahertz used by the military in crowd control. So we can only imagine what may be used here in the future. And this is the top of the line here, the extinction level event. And if you're interested in reviewing that, I suggest you watch a documentary that's freely available online called The 5G Apocalypse, the Extinction Event. This is a documentary by Sasha Stone, and he interviews a lot of people and puts together quite a dire picture of what may be involved here. I'm not going to take a stand on those views. You can make up your own mind where you are in that spectrum. But I do believe we're up against something that is totally unhealthy and totally against principles of curatorship, as we are humans, curators of planet Earth, being watchful and healthy curators, watching out for the other species. So the last part of my talk is how to stay healthy, what to do about all of this. So strategies to stay healthy, I'll enumerate them, and then I'm going to give you more detail. Number one, we need to measure the levels in our home and workplace. If we don't know and understand the levels, well, we don't know what we're exposed to, then we don't know really what to do. So this is really the first level of awareness. And you can buy simple meters to do this, and I'll tell you about them. Secondly, then you need to reduce your exposure to wireless. We recognize that these devices are useful, they're not going to go away, and probably 5G will be rolled out in most parts of the world. Maybe not in all versions, and maybe not all those satellites, but I expect a continuing evolution of this wireless technology, and it is useful, but there are problems, and we have to learn how to use them to stay healthy. So we need to reduce our exposure because many people are using these things just too frequently and keeping them on when they don't need them on, and that's a problem. And we need to use protective measures whenever we can, certain shielding that's available, and I'll tell you about some, especially things that are scientifically validated and not just because somebody says so. Stick this sticker on the back of your phone and then you're totally safe. There's a lot of those devices out there, and they scare me, frankly, because they give people the false sense of security that they're safe when I don't see the evidence why they're safe. Grounding yourself, what does that mean? I'll show you what earthing is all about. And you could also replace your wireless router with a wired one. And if you'd like instructions on how to do that, I can send them to you. It's a complicated procedure. But you could go back to what's called the Ethernet DSL. That was the earlier version before we had Wi-Fi. You may remember it. It's like a fat telephone cable and it plugged in. And really it's quick and fast and safe, and people can't hack it. With wireless, you're always susceptible to hackers into your wireless system. With wired, you're always safe. So here's the meter that I recommend, but it's only good through certain low frequencies of 5G. It covers 2G, 3G, and 4G, and a little bit of 5G, the first few rollouts, because they're going to roll out the lower frequencies first and then up to the higher frequencies. And it's called the Cornet ED88T Plus. And it's about $180. It's handheld. And it also gives you, in this little LCD screen here, you can see about a minute of activity of those pulses. You get a sense of the pulsation in your environment to which you can never adapt. Besides, you get values. And you can go back to that chart that I showed you, and you can see where you stand. If you'd like me to send you that chart, I can do that as well. Or I'll make it available on my website, even better. We're going to be making a 5G meter. We're already in the progress of this, so that people, it will be the people's meter, because the military meter costs $150,000, and sure, you can rent it for $1,000 a month. But I suggest we get a people's meter out there so people can measure their exposure. And this will have a different frequency band, so you know what you've got in terms of 2G through 5G. That will be useful. So we need to reduce our exposure to wireless, and we should adopt the precautionary principle and prudent avoidance. So whenever we're not using these devices, turn them off. In other words, the single most important thing you can do is to put your cell phone on airplane mode when you're not using it. Airplane mode is better than turning your phone off. In addition, you need to turn the Wi-Fi off and the Bluetooth off, or any other wireless functions it may have. And then your phone is like a brick. In other words, it doesn't emit anything. Then you can safely put it in your pocket, wherever. But it's not going to ring or ding or anything. However, the minute you turn it on, you'll receive the calls and the texts that you missed while it was in airplane mode, so it's fine. And in other words, then you have it on, you can quickly do your texting, your short calls, but don't leave it on. Then when you're done, put it back, turning off those functions. That's the single most important thing you can do. And by the way, it still remains in the era of 5G. The single most important thing you can do is control your own appliances, your cell phones, your Wi-Fi routers, your appliances, other wireless appliances, by turning them off or modulating your use of them down to minimal. So it's better to use a computer that's wired than a tablet or a cell phone. You could do your finances on this instead, and your emailing. And if it's wired, then it's safer. You can even figure out a way to wire your cell phone to your computer so that you're not using the wireless function on it. There's a way to use the cell phone actually wired via a cord to your computer. So you should also eliminate those landlines that are wireless, so-called DECT phones, digital electronic cell phones that have satellites, and one may be a little wired, but then the rest of them are all in wireless bases. These things emit even more radiation than smartphones from our studies, all of them. So we've also developed a way to lobotomize, I joke when I say that, to take off the Wi-Fi from your DECT phones. There's a procedure to do that. If you're interested in it, then you can email me and I'll email it to you. How to rescue your landline that may be a DECT phone, converting it to a wired phone. All the satellites will be useless, but you can use the main phone in a wired fashion. And as I told you, I eliminated my wireless mouse and wireless keyboard, and I eliminated my symptoms. I suggest you do this for your desktops, for your workstations, and other wired technology whenever possible. I wish we had an option. As cars get older, I would like to buy an analog car, but there are none. You know, my older cars are wearing out, and I'm looking around. Where do I find a car that doesn't have all of these bells and whistles of Wi-Fi and computers? And it's impossible, but I hope in the future somebody takes it upon themselves to offer a car for those who want one that's analog, because after all, we are analog beings. Now, there are certain protective devices and measures that you can use. Shielding, putting something in a metal cage shields it, protects the radio waves from coming at you, but of course it renders it like a brick. But if you shield your environment, for example, by painting a room with shielded paint, then you should never bring a wireless device in that room, because then it's going to bounce off the walls at an ever stronger dose and reach you. Similarly, you shouldn't sit in the car and make phone calls. You shouldn't use it at length in the car, because it bounces off the metal of the car and is enhancing the strength of the signal. There are certain protective devices. I'm going to show you a couple that I personally studied and published on. There's one website, it's not mine, but it's one of them that is a larger selection of devices that claim to be protective devices, and certainly the shielding is. I don't know how good it is, but they sell things like shielded clothing, and it's www.lessemf.com. And here are some of these devices that you can buy at that website. You can buy a cap if you want to shield your brain. You can buy travel ponchos that are mylar, or tents with mylar, and mylar, of course, is a metal aluminum in the plastic, so that's blocking the rays, or some of them at least. And then you can buy special mosquito netting for your bed that's made out of metal instead of just threads, and that will block radiation in your sleeping place. You can also buy clothing. Here's a hoodie with silver threads in the fabric that will block some, at least, of the radiation. And people who have electrosensitivity, some of them swear by this. Some of them say they felt instantly better putting on such garments or using such nettings around their bed. So they seem to work for some. In China, we found that there were aprons for pregnant women, although this was not recommended by the government per se. We did later find out that they were available, and they shield the fetus all the way around with a pretty sturdy, heavy metal under that plastic apron, and that's a good thing to protect the developing fetus. And I studied a couple of pendants that work not by blocking the energy of the device, which would render it useless, but instead by boosting the energy field of the human. by strengthening the life force within us. And one of them is called the Q-link, over here, containing a technology called sympathetic resonance technology. This is a passive device, there's no batteries, and it's operating by principles of subtle energy that aren't really well understood, but are the subject of many of these types of devices. This is one I can vouch for because there were studies at all levels on psychological stress of people exposed to EMF, electromagnetic fields that is, and cellular stress of organisms, stress of animals, etc. Across all of the levels of organization in biology, we found protection. Quantum field technology is less studied, but it's a device out of Hong Kong. Ames Kouechi Pendant 3 is the name of that device. So another study I did in recent years was on a cell phone app. This app no longer exists because of marketing pressures and issues, but it gave me great hope that we may be able to discover positive frequencies among all of these frequencies in the electromagnetic spectrum that may actually be beneficial to life. In other words, in this case, it improved heart rate variability, which said that autonomic balance is improved. That is, the balance of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, meaning that the stress response is reduced. When people simply turn on this app on their cell phone, and it was passively running in the background. So basically, it was bringing a frequency into the cell phone when it was in active use that was protective. And it was highly significant, p less than 0.001, with 20 subjects under both conditions. And it was probably the first randomized controlled trial to show that specific frequencies broadcast over the internet can be bioactive in a positive way. So I feel, I'm sad that this company has fallen down. It didn't do well in marketing, and you know, every day new apps come out and shadow the old apps, and pretty soon you've got zillions of apps out there, and people can't find your app. And if you don't have a big marketing muscle, there goes your app. It's kind of unknown. So that's what happened, and hopefully this will come back in another form in the future. But it shows me that one way around this whole problem is that we might choose more beneficial frequencies to operate our wireless devices or embed them in our wireless devices, and that would solve some of the health and environmental stress. So as I said, there are many purported protected devices, and buyer beware, because most of them are marketed without adequate study, in my opinion. I don't see a peer-reviewed scientific paper in a health journal published by an independent scientist, then I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't spend my money, because it's really not proven with just one or two cases on a website. I actually looked at several devices after I developed my blood bioassay, what I just showed you, and I found partial protection from some devices. I never found full protection from any device. So people who are sticking these little things on the backs of their phone and saying, I've got full protection, I can do this. I'm sorry, I don't believe it, and I hope you are, but I doubt it. So buyer beware. And we really could use funding to do comparative studies for what we might use to protect ourselves. In other words, we want to find out what are the best devices out there. And maybe they work synergistically. If we use this one in combination with this one, maybe we can help better protect ourselves. So that's the idea, but I haven't found funding to do that. We're hoping to raise that money. It needs to happen. It's not enough to just study devices in isolation by single companies, but rather to compare them and know what works, because we face a huge public health problem. This is nothing small, and this needs to be seriously addressed in a large-scale fashion. There are some other protective measures you can make. Opt out of a smart meter. Most states allow you to do this. For a long time in California, they made people pay extra money to opt out, both to reinstall the old analog meter or to, because somebody has to come out and read the meter once a month. But you can opt out, I think, and some states are not even allowing smart meters, from what I heard, because our experience was so devastating in California. We had a slew of electrosensitive people, right after the installation. I had a bunch of clients who were desperate, wondering what to do. They couldn't sleep in their homes. They couldn't work anymore. They were suffering pain syndromes and headaches. And I could believe them because I could turn and on and off a cell phone unbeknownst to them, and they would start crying in pain. I could see that they were suffering. So if you have that problem too, you could do more drastic things like turning off your electric power at night. The refrigerator will still stay well, and so will the freezer. You could also have your Wi-Fi router on a timer and have it turn off at night. That's a good partial solution. And I certainly think that children should not use the wireless devices. We have seen enough with developing organisms and with brainwave studies and with learning disabled children in our midst that we should be banning Wi-Fi in schools, as they did in preschools in France. They really took this upon themselves. And with baby monitors using only the wired versions. Earthing is another thing you can do, and this is a very healthy thing. I highly recommend whether you're using any wireless device or not, and that is to get barefoot and in the soil or the grass or the sand. And or you can actually use technology that will help you get grounded, which has metallic threads in it and connects to the third the plug outlet of ground, or you can send it out the window and really put a real ground rod into the earth. When people get grounded, there are studies showing better sleep, less pain, reduced stress, and improved immune function. So here's a real thing you can do. And if you can't get outside, you can buy these devices. And there are websites on them, and there are even earthing shoes, because our shoes are also isolated from Earth. But Earth is rich in electrons, and that's what we lack. We're getting electron depleted in our environments of artificial synthetics and shoes that insulate us. So we can buy shoes that have connections like that for each toe to touch the earth, or sometimes the connecting thing in kidney 1, acupuncture point on the shoe. And we can get hoodies with cords that go to earthing, and so this is a viable solution. There's at least one paper that I read that showed very good results with EMF stress on humans who get earthed or grounded. Harry Jabs, my partner, and I have a hypothesis that this challenge at this pivotal time in history is really one of a spiritual challenge for humanity. And we think that cultivating a higher personal vibration, a state of positive affect of love and joy and gratitude, as opposed to negative emotions, may help offset some of the negative health effects from electromagnetic fields, and especially wireless. And this means to cultivate an enduring state of love and joy is so important for our health, and known well by positive psychologists who study the effects of positive affect on health. It's been shown in numerous studies that people who cultivate such positive affect get over their diseases more readily, and they actually maintain health where there are issues, where others are falling. So I suggest this is another way we can do it, and it's really a spiritual approach. We also have developed a detector at our laboratory that we call it a subtle energy detector. We set about to detect the life force, the chi, the prana, and I think we got something that does that. In addition, it seems to respond positively to these positive states of love and joy in the moment. So it's an emotional detector that's dynamic. So every second it takes a data point, and whether it's going up or down, we can see whether someone's mood and relaxation and love and joy is increasing, or whether they're having a conversation maybe that's stressing them and causing fear or anger or hostility, and then we watch the needle go down on our charts. So we can actually test then whether people are in a state of enduring positive affect, and I believe this will render people more resilient to the ravages of 5G frequencies, but that remains to be seen. It's just a hypothesis. So there's a picture of our sensor suite with subtle energy detectors, and we have a lot of detectors there. We look at the environment, we look at alpha, beta, gamma emission, we look at the Earth's magnetic field, we look at temperature, humidity, we look at galvanic skin response, we look at other things. And then we have the subtle energy sensors, and people try to influence them, and they can. And these sensors are totally isolated from all conventional energies and Faraday cages, and no magnetic field or electric field can penetrate, or thermal field. And they're totally isolated. So there is something more that the human being exudes, and it seems to be related to this realm of spirit, this realm of love and joy and gratitude. So in conclusion, the radiation from wireless technology poses hazards to our health, and we're all at risk. No matter if you're electrosensitive or not, we're all at risk. These are real stressors. They work at many levels of organization and living systems, from atomic, molecular, up through the behavioral and performance levels. We can expect 5G to be more hazardous than 4G or 3G because it will be so extensive, because it involves so many frequencies and much higher frequencies that have more activity on life forms. So we need to take personal action. We need to practice enhanced self-care. We could choose to meditate to raise our vibration. We could choose to pray. We could choose protective devices that have solid research behind them. But we do need to reduce our wireless exposure, I think, and to use proven protective measures to improve our overall well-being. And I'd like to read to you a quotation by Rudolf Steiner. I suppose you know who he was. And he was a prophet well ahead of his times, amazing man who brought in spiritual to the scientific together, and many things, applications in agriculture and education. So he lived between 1861 and 1925, an era where electricity was rolled out in the form of electric lighting. Here's what he wrote about electricity. We must be quite clear about this. In the days when there were no electric currents, when there were no electric wires buzzing in the air, it was easier to be human. In those days, those aromatic forces, those are the forces that tend to bring people down to the mechanistic or mechanical, materialistic level. In those days, these aromatic forces were not there, constantly robbing us of our body, even when we are awake. It wasn't necessary then for people to make such efforts in order to approach the spirit. That is why it is necessary today to muster far stronger spiritual forces merely to remain human than it was 100 years ago. And this was said 100 years ago to us. So it's 200 years that he's talking about. So a lot of the world has changed. And it's interesting to note, the effects of electricity on life, how we can stay up late, how we get away from natural rhythms of the planet and the sun. And I'd like you to do a little meditation with me, because I know that this talk was the red pill. And I'd like you to close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath together. Let's breathe together. Inhale slowly. And exhale slowly. I'd like you to take another breath now and breathe in courage and strength. And breathe out any fears or doubts. Lord, please help us take right action in this world today, with so many onslaughts to our health, our wellness, our environment, and the future of the world is in your hands. Blessings. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Wasn't that phenomenal? Yeah. Does anybody see? This is when you go to talk to various officials, especially like city officials, politicians, and they want to say, okay, well, what's the science behind what you're trying to tell us about 5G? Well, there it is. There's a lot of science, and thank you, Beverly. That was phenomenal. We were just so impressed. I want to just give a few acknowledgments, and then we'll go into some Q&A. I want to, first of all, thank Byron Belitzis, who was the one who initiated, had the idea here to have this event with Beverly. I also want to thank so many of my friends and activists in this community for helping to promote this event tonight. Let's see, we have Donna, we have Gordon, we have many others. Let's see, Guy, and I know I'm going to forget a few, but you know who you are. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your help in promoting tonight, Stephanie. And so important. I want to say thank you very much to Gary Null. How many people heard of the event through Gary Null's show today? Look at that. Excellent, excellent. Anybody here, Michael Haskins on WBAI promote the event? Great, great, thank you. I want to thank also our tech team. I want to start with another local legend in media here, which is Joe Friendly, right here. He has a long-standing show on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network called Truth for a Change. And I want to thank Hamuk, who are another genius in our tech world, who's a long-standing member of our video teams and for many, many decades here, and came in from Rhode Island, from Providence. Thank you, Hamuk. And thank you to No Lies Radio, Alan Reese, who is live streaming tonight. So guess what, folks? This is having a reach far beyond New York City. Thank you to Kat McGuire as well for her efforts in helping promote tonight and being a great host for us. And one more I see. Nick Curto, another long-standing, cutting-edge activist, just beyond what is imaginable. Thank you for your efforts. To Dusty Burke of Westview News. We have another great media source here. Thank you, Dusty. Say hi. All right. So, and I would just quickly add, there's a sheet over here. Hopefully you all have it about what you can do for taking political action. It is so, so important. I think this is a phenomenal opportunity, right? I mean, to be able to contact your city council member, your state senator, your state assembly person, and of course your Congress people. Why? Because we need to be pulling their chain, saying, hey, this is an absolutely existential threat, and your constituents need you to be on top of this issue and protecting their interests. Yeah, thank you. So I urge everybody to look at it that way. It's a great opportunity. Let's have fun with it. And matter of fact, I think what we need to be doing is saying that since 5G has never really been tested, and it's being pushed as the next new frontier, the next new industrial revolution, et cetera, for human consumption, we need to be saying to the heads of the FCC, to our politicians, and absolutely to the heads of Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, we need to be saying to, okay, all these official institutes as well, ANSI, why don't you be the test subjects? Really? Because isn't that fair? That we should be able to expect from all these leaders that represent industry and policy making, that we should be able to expect that they are working in behalf of the priorities here is protection of the public, protection of the planet, protection of our ecosystem and all living things, upon which survival depends. That's what we should be able to expect. And if it's not happening, well, we need to let them know. And since it does need to happen, why don't they be the canary in the coal mine? Really? Okay, that's where we need to go with this. So Beverly will be taking questions shortly. Okay, I'm not the main speaker here. And with that, what we can do, we have a microphone right here. This is the way we can do this. For people who like to ask some questions, come right to the center aisle in a line, and then come up to the microphone. In this way, you'll be recorded as well for our filming. Okay? Who would like to come up?
Hi, Doctor. So my question is very practical. I have an iPhone 6s. I did some research. I found like an SAR chart. I think Samsung's and some other phones, like the Galaxies, Samsung Galaxies and some other phones, had a third of the SAR rate of iPhones. So my thing is like 4 years. I'm about to replace the phone, and I'm just wondering if you have a few suggestions as far as mitigating radiation of phones held on person. What I had in mind, I have a case on my phone right now. It's called a Pong research case. It's now called Alara, where it propels radiation away from your head, and ferret beads on a wired connection from the phone to my ears using an air tube. And I'm just wondering what are some ways I could step it up, and what are some of the better phones? And if you can't give specific recommendations, what's a good chart or resource for me to find those lowest SAR rated phones that are most recently developed?
That's a good question. I must admit I haven't measured all of the models out there, but in general, Android models emit far less than Apple products. So take that into account. But something else, some research that was done in Sweden showed that even if you reduce the cell phone radiation by 1,000 times, still the blood-brain barrier is affected. And I can tell you that the Androids are not 1,000 times less than the iPhone or the Apple products. So we're still at risk using such phones. Now, I haven't looked into the Pong case in particular or your other method. So again, there are so many different ways people are trying to protect themselves. There's also the mineral shungite from Russia. And again, I read the book on shungite, but I haven't really seen any real data showing, well, what is this doing to people? If something blocks the radiation on your phone, then it's not going to work. You know, and so what does a protective device really mean? The ones I studied boost the human energy field. They have a totally different strategy. They don't touch or tamper with the radiation coming out of your phone. Now, I certainly think it's a good idea to use shields on your phone, around your phone, but then the phone has to be totally wrapped. The Pong case, as I saw it, did not totally wrap the phone, so then the energy is going to come out of the sides and still reach your body. So you look for a shield around your phone if, that's totally covering it. And ideally, you could turn your phone in airplane mode and then just turn it on when you use it. And you don't need any shielding then. But remember, that means Wi-Fi off and Bluetooth off, as well as the cell phone on airplane mode. Yes? Well, let me say one more thing about that. You know, even if we can't change the position of antennas in our neighborhood and the satellites, the single most important emitter in your life is what's in your immediate surroundings. You have control over that. We can all lower our exposure by our practices with our tablets, our cell phones, our computers, our Wi-Fi modems if you choose to have one or get a wired one. So we have enormous control over our exposure, despite what's out there. And take advantage of this, learn what to do, and practice it religiously. You'll be healthier for it. Okay.
Okay. Hi, my name's Matt. Thanks for coming here and presenting. It's very informative. I just wanted to know, like, it seems like none of these movements, like the Green New Deal, the Sunshine and the Extinction Rebellion, Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, Amy Goodman, Independent. Nobody's talking about this. What's going on here? Like, why is nobody really talking about the dangers that this poses and is making any effort to stop it? At that level, I don't know if any of these so-called, progressive people are doing anything. I just wanted to know if anybody here knows if anybody is doing anything Also, like, is there a way to track the stuff coming into the city? Like, is there like some type of application for permits, or they're just putting them up without telling anybody, or is there some way we can look up like what's here now? Because I get different information from different people about the extent of these 5G antennas here now and moving forward. Like,
Okay, you've got
so
two
those
questions
two questions,
there.
yeah.
First question.
Yeah.
So these various groups don't seem to be addressing the issue. It seems to me that every group is addressing singular issues. What we need is more holistic systems approaches in our activist populations. Because I showed you that chemicals and Wi-Fi work synergistically and cause problems with the central nervous system. But I don't see these groups that are talking about mercury incorporating the problem of wireless into their arguments. They seem focused on minutia, maybe what they know best. They understand chemicals, but they don't understand the physics. They need to combine forces with groups that do. Okay? That's what I recommend. We need more holistic systems thinkers among our activists, where they need the education to be empowered to bring these ideas together and say, there are multiple onslaughts to life, and they work synergistically, and we don't want this. And we have to then work at many levels. So it's not enough to work in your silos. It's not enough anymore, not with the world of problems we have today. Okay, the second question was, now I got to refresh my memory. Oh, yes. Right. There's a website, I think it's antennas.org, where you can look up where the antennas are relative to your home. It may not be the website, but check it out on Google. But there's more, antennasearch.org or maybe .com. But you know, you can read the city telecom ordinance. It should be on the website for whatever city you live in. I have found almost all of them. Looking for Berkeley and other cities, they're online. You can read exactly what the ordinance specifies with respect to wireless installations, whether the industry needs permits. Most of them do. But now with this rubber stamping thing because of the fast track, which is being contested, so maybe this won't happen. Maybe things will slow down. That's our hope, that we can stall this, because we need this environmental assessment and a full report before this thing goes into full gear. That's my hope. But check out your city. And in some cities, let me say what they're doing. The activists are rewriting the telecom ordinance. Berkeley, California, for example, is creating an emergency city telecom ordinance that will replace the existing one with the terms that the people of Berkeley would like, now that they understand the problem. So you can also instigate this in your respective cities. Or maybe it's at the county level, but in any case, you can go to any level of your local government and try. Many of them will say, well, we don't have jurisdiction over this because of this federal law. But you'll find sympathetic people, and you may be able to do something anyway. And then we may reverse some of these federal laws.
I want to thank you for this presentation, and especially for making it a spiritual, casting it in a spiritual cast, which I think is what we're all here for. So, and also I want to thank Les, because he really inspired me when he was talking to our legislators and calling on them to help us and protect us because we are their constituents. And for that, it occurred to me something that just happened in my own life. My building that I live in, 102nd Street and 5th Avenue, was offered by a telecommunications company, it wasn't specified which one, offered us $35,000 a year to put a cell tower on our roof. So luckily, I and the other activist in my building spoke to the board president and explained why that wouldn't be a good idea for us, and they turned it down. However, it was clear that if we turned it down, and they have to put a cell tower every 3 to 5 buildings, they were going to talk to some of our neighbors. So it occurred to me that I would be in a good position to speak to them, but I couldn't just walk up to a building and say, I want to talk to your board. And I needed a little bit of backup. So I asked my council member, Diana Ayala, to provide a letter we had already spoken with her, Deputy Chief of Staff, some months previously, and they were considerably concerned about this, but she turned us down. And I think I really have to send a letter and say, you have really you have not taken the steps that you need to do to protect your constituents. And I think we need to just, call her out. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm aware of the placement of antennas on senior centers and schools. There was a case in Central Valley, California, a town close to Modesto, California in the north, where a school was getting $2,000 a month for a 4G antenna placed on site. A cancer cluster just after a few years, 6 or 7 cases, including deaths, children as well as teachers.
Oh my God. Is that the school that sued to?
Well, actually, they clamored at T-Mobile. I think it was a T-Mobile antenna.
Yeah.
So the parents put pressure on the school to remove the antenna or they would take their children out of the school.
Right.
The school did remove the antenna.
Yes, good. Yeah, well, they should remove them all.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Hi. Hi, I'm Gwen Goodwin, and maybe I'll be your next council member. I've run for 3 times, so I'm running again, and this is a big issue to me, but that's not why I wanted to come up. I almost don't want to know the answer. To piggyback on what Stephanie was saying is I do live in a building. I do live on the top floor, and all over my roof I have antennas, and I really almost don't want to know the answer because it's terrifying to me. The landlord gets $15,000 a month. This is very much an issue of rich and poor because I don't see these antennas mostly on wealthier people's buildings. I see them all over in East Harlem where I live, on poor people, on tenement buildings. People that live in buildings like me that are rent stabilized, we just can't leave. The rents are just too high. So you're stuck and you have to endure it. So one, I wanted to know if you could tell me just how bad, because I really can't afford to leave. And 2, I wanted to know about these antennas that are wireless that you attach. I don't have Wi-Fi, so I just have one of those air antennas, and I don't know whether that was causing any more issues in my apartment for me, whether they're safe or unsafe. And I also, because I am wireless, I go with a hotspot. So how dangerous is it to use a hotspot? Last thing I wanted to ask you is, as I travel up and down the East Coast, I went upstate the other day and I see almost every single mountain now has a gigantic tower. I mean, they're just huge on top of it. And one of them was even disguised as a Christmas tree, as a gigantic pine tree.
Yes.
Where my mother lives in Cape May, we've just got a huge tower across the street from my parents, which was just installed. I was assuming these are part of the 5G rollouts, but I might be wrong. But these are new towers that I've never seen before, and they are much bigger than what I've seen before. So, sorry to give you so much. It will be on my platform next time I run in 2020. And can you answer those questions?
That's a lot of questions.
Thanks.
First of all, you don't have a wireless antenna at home. I hope it's a router. And you're using a hotspot router? Is that from somebody else?
For the TV.
For the television.
TV, you put this thing on the back of your TV.
Okay.
And it.
That's another story.
Yeah,
it's only
okay.
a receiver.
Okay, but that's so you can have an analog TV with a clearer picture without having to buy Wi-Fi.
Okay, I don't know about those. I don't even own a television.
Okay.
To tell you the truth, I haven't measured.
I have an analog car too.
I see. Yes. Hotspot is also a problem. And one thing we found out with wireless routers, some people didn't want them anymore, so we figured out how to turn off the Wi-Fi in the router. But there was still a hotspot left that we could not figure out how to turn off. So then we said, don't use the router of these companies that are sending the signals. Go get a generic router that will not have a hotspot. You can find them at stores like Best Buy. And then you don't have to deal with this hotspot problem that's residual after you turn off the Wi-Fi. So,
and the things on top of my roof.
Well,
Am I being
People at higher levels of elevation in buildings are definitely getting more radiation than
I mean, they're sitting
lower.
right on top of my bedroom. I've got
Well, you remember these things
towers.
are going out more laterally
Okay.
than they are down, but it's hard to say with these side lobes. I showed you how that's going to be because they may be serving people in your apartment. I don't know. You know, we don't know anything until we take a measuring meter to your place and really know it. You know, I can just hand wave here and say maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
So that's the bottom line, and that's why we need a people's meter for 5G.
Okay.
But I can say this, you know, if you live in a gulch, you're better off than if you live in a penthouse. So I can see all these New York penthouses devaluating in price and people wanting to live in a valley where the radiation is less.
Well, I'm the top floor of a valley. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you a couple of things. One is about smart meters. Con Ed forced upon our apartment buildings a 48-unit building. It's a HCFC co-op. We have 48 electric meters and 48 gas meters.
You're talking about smart meters?
Smart meters.
Okay.
And
Are the gas meters also smart or just regular?
they're making them smart.
Oh.
So that's 96 meters in our building, in the basement. And I live on the top floor, which is the 7th floor. But the people on the ground floor and the lower floors, that's a lot of smart meters in one space.
Right.
And they're doing that in all the buildings all over Manhattan, probably the rest of New York, because they're doing it in the suburbs too. So then the other thing is they have it sounds great, solar panels on the roof, right, for these apartment buildings. But I've read that there's a converter from the direct current that is the solar energy, received solar energy, has to be converted to AC, to alternating current, and those converter boxes give off a lot of dirty electricity. So if you live on the top floor, it's not a good idea to have those on your roof. And the other thing about the basement smart meters, I asked for an opt-out. You have to pay, I think it's $9 a month. But the thing is, so I looked, there's a woman, her last name is Kurtz in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and she does a lot about smart meters, and she has a website and everything. And so I contacted her because I had contacted her a few years ago about another situation, and she said that it's better actually. It's a trick that they're doing because, and I asked Con Ed, they said they will not keep your analog meter. They will replace them all with digital meters, and if you opt out, you'll still have a digital meter, but it'll be turned off in some way. Something will be turned off. But this woman said that actually those digital meters that aren't smart give off more dirty electricity up through the wiring in your house than a smart meter. So either way, you know.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by a digital meter that's not a smart meter. I've either seen the analog meters with little rotating things or the smart meter, which clearly says smart meter. Those are the only two meters I've seen.
I kind of doubt that, but you know, apparently there's some way they turn off the transmission. But even so, dirty electricity is circulating through your wires into your apartment, which is more so than if it's a smart meter, apparently.
Well, there are special filters for dirty electricity. There's a Stetzer filter for dirty electricity. It's a whole other issue.
What is that
Stetzer filter?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm Arnold Gore. Thank you for your presentation. I had a lot of these ideas in favoring a wired connection. So when I got my computer, I made sure I had an Ethernet connection. And I thought, well, that would be fine. And then all of a sudden, you know, I do turn my router off in the evening. And I saw that, you know, when I tried to sign on to my computer, I was not able to get a connection anymore, although I had the Ethernet cable. Evidently, Verizon did something to switch the Ethernet cable off. I can't get the cable connection, even though I have an Ethernet cable, and it goes through wireless. So I called Verizon and tried to have them change it. they were telling me the only way I can do that is by connecting the Ethernet cable into the wireless router.
Okay.
I can't get the connection which I'm supposed to have. And I also have a landline telephone because I try not to call on my cell phone. But sure enough, I see now when I try to use my landline phone to make calls, they seem to not go through. It says, try again later, try again later. But when I try it on my cell phone, I get through.
Okay.
They are not maintaining the infrastructure for the landlines and the
I'm not
and the
surprised.
wired connections.
And you're
I think
absolutely right.
we're running into trouble on that.
There's going to be a phase out of landlines, the copper wire landlines. We
I
were
think
told
they're-
this by AT&T.
They're starting to do that.
Yes.
And I think I've seen a lot of increase in brain cancers, but they're messing up the data by saying it's only the more serious brain cancers, the GBM that is hard to cure, that is increasing, whereas the others are decreasing. So they say the overall brain cancer rate isn't going up. But by the way, I would also like to mention that the author of this FCC legislation that said localities are not allowed to regulate for health was John McCain, who died of brain cancer very recently.
Oh, my.
It's very ironic, but he died of brain cancer. And there were a number of other senators who also had brain cancer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nick Curto. I'm from Disclosure Network New York and the Urantia Society of Greater New York. I just want to comment quickly that your presentation was layered, amazing. You hit a home run. It was one of the finest presentations in my life. And just thank you so much. You deserve to hear that. My comment is that the AMA, the World Health Organizations, who supposedly are looking out for us, why aren't they in the courts? Why haven't we heard a word from any of them that I know of? What happened? They probably did know this years ahead of time. And where are they? Do you have any comment?
That's a good question. Where are our leaders these days? Looking out for our welfare, our health, et cetera. It seems like at many levels of our governments, just imagine from community upward, there's a loss of connection where the government of, by, and for the people is set aside. And we see many special interests fostered instead. And to the point where I feel we've practically to the point of a corporatocracy at the federal level. What do I mean by that? Government serving big business.
Right.
And in some countries that was called fascism. Wow. So let's recognize it and let's take our government back. And let's tell these organizations it's about us, not them. Right. It's about the 99%. Remember the Wall Street movement on that, but it wasn't just to be done at Wall Street. It really needs to be done in halls of government.
Well, thank you. I have 3 podcasts currently here in New York City, and I'm going to ask you to be on all 3 of them as a future guest. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm stunned at how good this was. I'm very active in climate change, and I think I don't know how many of us here started in climate change and then realized this was a huge issue. But, you know, there is in Congress a committee on the Green New Deal which surveys the environmental groups. And I don't think it would be a bad idea for us to go back to our buddies in the environmental groups and tell them when they get surveyed to bring this issue up. I also think another entree is that in the Green New Deal, there's a huge amount of interest in agriculture, healthy agriculture. And if we have these cell phones, et cetera, that are killing our bees, then I think any person who's doing climate legislation would freak out and say, oh my God, thank you for telling us. And the other thing I want to say is, by accident, somebody handed me something a few months ago. I opened it up, and it's a New York Senate bill, S-1618, and they seem to be hedging on the smartphone issue. They seem to be hedging. But almost every committee of the New York State Senate is a co-sponsor of this mild little bill that says, if you don't want your smartphone, if we pass this rule, you can ask for it to be removed, and if you do it within a year, you don't have to pay anything. So there's something going on to build on. I just wanted to say that.
I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
Have you seen the new, I just received an Amex new card with a little Wi-Fi thing on it, and it's much heavier than a standard credit card. Do you know anything about those?
Well, yes, the credit cards now can be placed on a little tray and the data taken freely, so it's beyond the chip. It's the latest thing.
So is that Wi-Fi?
No.
Because it has a Wi-Fi symbol.
It does have the Wi-Fi symbol. Maybe the reader has some Wi-Fi.
Because you don't even have to touch it.
No.
Okay. As long as it's not Wi-Fi.
There's no battery in your credit card. It's a passive device.
Hello, Steve Weaver, dedicated listener to WBAI and all the program luminaries in WBAI politics, and Gary Nolan in particular. That's why I'm here, but thanks to his announcement. What I wanted is copying some information, not all of it, but some of the most important that I've read here in the beginning when I came here about an hour ago, like targeted individuals, and I did not get all that information on the website. And do you have a CD or DVD available, or a hard copy source of your own?
Actually, this talk is going to be put on the internet, I think on YouTube. And I'm not sure which channel, but you can fill us in.
Well, No Lies Radio.
NoLiesRadio.org.
NoLiesRadio.org.
Okay, very good. Very good.
Good.
I appreciate it. But you should follow up or back up with a suggestion, a CD,
Okay.
even a DVD, and a hard copy, which the DVD's new hard copy is, as opposed to just YouTube. That's my idea.
We'll put out either a document or a book on this shortly.
A documentary?
Or a book. A document, a paper
Yeah.
on our websites, or a book.
Will the WBAI publicize that website when the information's ready?
Well, I will talk to Gary about it. Gary Null.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Maybe he'd sell the premiums. That would be a good idea. I met him at a talk in a church on the Upper East Side, 80th Street. I forget the name of the church. But he's well known, hard hitting, pulls no punches, and he's nobody's fool. And I thank him for it. Everybody here does too. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I come by way of our mutual friend in California, Dawn.
Dawn, yes, yes.
My area of activism is the environment, climate change, but the deeper you get, the more you realize it's all connected. And you made that point about the blood-brain barrier, and you connected it to big pharma and vaccines and agriculture and glyphosate, and then you realize how big this really is, and the more you read, I get defeatist and I get depressed, and I wonder if there's anything we can really do. But I want more of that type of information written in ways that regular people can understand. Sometimes I read the research, and I'm a healthcare professional and I've done research, and even that gets too deep for me sometimes. So I'd like to know where to find that first of all? And then where do I find some motivation to keep going when I feel that in our leaders, if it's not ignorance, it's ambivalence. If it's not ambivalence, it's corruption. How do we get anyone to listen?
Well, I think instead of fighting what is out there, we almost need to start over and build something new. And those were the words of Buckminster Fuller, rather than trying to solve the problem at the level of which it was created, just start something new. I mean, there's a lot of people here. Maybe you're all motivated to meet, get together, talk about this, and see what you can do locally in your communities. I think when you have support, it's not so depressing anymore.
Right.
And
I
in terms
want to
of
spread the word,
yes,
but I want to make it so that
right now this information, I should be writing it up and explaining how, because I haven't seen anything where somebody puts together the chemical and the electromagnetic stressors and how they work synergistically.
The way you did.
Well, I read both literatures, but I'm a biophysicist, and I read the biochemistry as well as the physics. But that's not typical, because people are trained these days in our colleges in minutia and reductionism and thinking about small problems in great detail instead of thinking broadly. So we need more education to think about broad ecological systems.
Well, that was just such a great little piece of information that I can take back and explain. And, someone can say, well, 5G just bounces right off you. Don't worry about it. Because I heard that today already.
Well, I hope you feel empowered to do something and not disheartened, because first I gave you some things you can do immediately to reduce your exposure. And even if all this stuff goes in, you can still reduce your exposure. Because the greatest control you have and the greatest exposures are from your own appliances. Right. So take heart.
Thank you.
And get the word out so that other people don't get depressed, but they can take action.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. Excellent. Quick question about solar panels. I've had three companies come over. I told them, I want panels, I don't want a smart meter. All three of them said we can't do it. However, what happened before smart meters? Weren't there solar panels?
There must be a zoning problem in your city that they require this in order to have that. But
it's not, as far as your knowledge, it's not mandatory.
I don't know why that's so. Again, every city has, to get a building permit, you need to follow the zoning rules about how you do things. So they want your solar to feed back into the smart grid. Therefore, they want you to connect your solar to a smart meter. That's the thinking. They want the one world grid, which is really not smart, because when it goes down, it all falls down. The more delocalized we have power, it's safer, really, then the whole grid doesn't take us down.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My name is Juan. I'd just like to make a comment. I'm a construction worker, and I go to people's houses. I see people having a whole lot of children and not being aware of what's happening with all this electronic stuff. My friend told me that he went to a house where the couple has 20 children, and they don't talk about this. So there should be a movement to inform people who are having all these babies and exposing them to all this technology, not being aware of how harmful it is, that things are not as they were 50 or 100 years ago. You cannot continue all these religious traditions where women are being used to as baby pumping machines, all these religions. So I'm very concerned about children. I have 4 grandchildren, and I see them using all these gadgets. And I speak to my children, and they don't want to stop. So I'm very concerned about what's happening with babies and with the women and everything else. So
I'm too.
That's my comment.
Well, I would say, we need to get this in the education of social workers and healthcare providers, but so far, not so much. It only goes in the alternative schools like Saybrook University, where I teach. I haven't seen it widely in curricula. Please.
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm just curious, do you ever talk to the scientists that create this technology?
Well, I don't really know who creates all this technology. It's a lot of different people, and largely engineers who are not thinking about health and environment. Again, remember, people are trained myopically in one little field. And they do their little bit to make a device because they're told this is your job, make something new.
Yeah, but they got to have homes just like us to have the same.
But these engineers would not be aware of the biophysics that I presented tonight. So again, the living in silos, the educational system that's reductionistic of this little
it's that
field
big,
over here versus this little field. Yes, this is how it is. Scientists don't know what engineers do, and engineers don't know what scientists do. It's like that.
You must have seen the movie Monsanto. You must have seen the movie on Monsanto, right? The documentary. The scene that interests me most in that film is when George H.W. Bush is in the lab with the scientist who has a sheet of wheat in his hand, and the scientist is convincing him how much stronger this wheat's going to be. You know, I mean, how could he believe that himself? You know, they believe in their own stuff like that. You know.
Well, I didn't see that film. I'm sorry, but you know, as I said, there's knowledge is in silos too, and people need to read more broadly beyond their little discipline that everything looks rosy here, but what about this and what about this and this? And that's what's not getting out there. We don't have an educational system that educates people broadly into thinking ecologically, chemicals, Wi-Fi, how do these things synergistically work? We don't have that kind of system of education. So it's far and few between who understand this big picture. But the word needs to get out, so now that you know it, take it out.
Excuse me?
I said the word needs to get out there, so now that you know this, take it out there.
I've been doing that for years.
Good.
Okay, very, very well. I only have two questions. First one is with regard to airplane mode. I always thought turning off the phone was good, but you're saying it's better to put it on airplane mode,
yes.
And I wanted to know why. Oh, yeah, airplane mode.
The airplane mode is better because there's no more radiation coming out of the phone. When you turn the phone off, unless you take the battery out, the phone is not really off. It still communicates with the GPS, the global positioning satellites. And at every 10 times a second still sends out a pulse, at least on my phone. So that's what goes on. So only airplane mode and Wi-Fi off and Bluetooth off is really off. There's no hard off switch on your phone.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have two quick questions. You mentioned shungite, so I know it's used, sometimes people speak of it as an attenuator, but they also speak of it as an enhancer of the bioenergetic field. So I wonder if you have a comment in that regard. And also the 5G, what is the effect, if there is, or a masking effect on like Schumann resonance or the Earth's geomagnetics?
Those are both good questions. Shungite, I actually haven't measured what it does, I must confess. There's a popular book on shungite, which gives a lot of lore, but very little on scientific data. And I haven't found any papers in the peer-reviewed literature on it, and I haven't had time, and certainly no funding to study it. So I'm sorry I don't have an answer. And your second question was on, what was it again? Oh, Schumann, yeah. The Earth has natural frequencies known as Schumann resonance. One is 7.83 hertz, and there's about 14 hertz in harmonics. These are dwarfed by the intensity of all of these radiations. Those signals are very, very low, natural signals. But still, they're pacemakers for life on Earth.
So if that's disruptive to the bees and the animals, as a masking of that, and also the addition to the negative of the 5G itself, so sort of it's a double.
It's a double whammy. If the animals can't feel or sense the natural geophysical frequencies, and then they also only sense the artificial ones, they're totally confused. Look at the behavior of bees. I'm a gardener. I look at them. They can't even find a flower. They look half dead. And part of it is from agrochemicals, and part of it is from Wi-Fi. I'm not saying it's 100% Wi-Fi. There's a synergy operating health-wise and environmentally wise, and we need to consider both. We can't do one or the other anymore. It's that big. Okay.
Thank you. So, where are all the lawyers? Let's get some good lawyers working with us. And really, we need to step it up here. We have urgency. I think you all know that. just be in touch with us. Hopefully you also signed the contact sheet, and we'll make sure that you hear about ongoing activities. By the way, on December 14th is a Saturday from 1 to 4. We'll be meeting in the West Village at the Revelation Gallery. That's 224 Waverly Place. Okay? And continuing the activity. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful New York night. Hope to see you next time.